Hello and welcome to Newbie Debate. This is the next installment in the Novice Debate 101 series. This and hopefully the next few others will be some shorter videos in contrast to the longer ones that we've had over the last few, because we're going to be talking about debate in practice. And for the purposes of this video and probably some other ones, we're looking at like Microsoft Word today because I'm going to show you some of my debate files from previous topics. This won't be super pertinent to you if you're got a good memory and can write down some of these articles. Maybe they won't be super helpful to the Arctic. I'm sorry, but maybe some of them are. And so we're just going to go through my previous years just to show you more of an example of what things look like. So maybe if you open up files yourself, things aren't going to look as unfamiliar to you. Just to start, though, there's going to be a future episode where I give you a tutorial on how to get this, and you might need help from administration if you aren't currently on Word, or if you have the laptop or whatever you're on has maybe some stricter admin policies or her privileges. You might not be able to download this, but this is this tab up here is for a program called Verbatim. It's from Paperless Debate. Not going to get too in depth on that because there will be an episode that you can skip if you already have this or already know about it, but it's a macro program that you can attach to your Microsoft Word that gives you the ability to have this debate tab, because normally it's just file and then home. And on any verbatimized document, you can verbatize, which will add this tab and add in the macros, which lets you do a bunch of things, which we'll get into in that paperless debate verbatim tutorial. But for the purposes of this, just that's why this tab's here, and we'll go through a more in-depth video on that probably next. So this, we've kind of already went over this in previous episodes, but this is an example of what we call a card. So the reason why they're called cards is because they used to do them on note cards. It's pretty interesting. They would grab a note card and print out an article, and then you would cut the card, which it's still called cutting. Like if you said cleared all the formatting here, didn't get rid of the highlighting, so we'll have to manually go do that. Go no color. This is just like an article. You would cut out the different paragraphs, and then maybe you decided I want to read this bit, and so then you'd highlight these. Point is, they used to fit on a note card because you would cut out all the things you didn't want to read and just read the stuff that you wanted to read. We still call them cards, even though they have not been on note cards for a very long time. Even in the world of paper debate, people will still put things on a full Word document just because it's a lot easier to do. But a card starts with the tagline right here. This one starts with backsliding and ends with expansionism. This is the tagline. So this is the tagline of the card. And then the card goes all the way to this bit right here. So this is one card. So ignore this Russia hybrid war escalates. We'll get that off our screen here and ignore this bit because that's something else entirely we'll talk about in a second. But the card consists of the tagline, as we said, which is a sentence-ish long explanation of what this says. So rather than reading this entire thing every single time you want to reference it, you can generally say what this article is saying is, or at least this specific part of it is saying, backsliding powers Russia and Chinese revisionism. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. Causes Russian aggression and hybrid warfare and Chinese expansionism. Once again, not important that you know what this tagline means, but that's what this is saying in a sentence. And the article comes from, I'm not entirely sure I don't want to mispronounce the name, but it's this individual right here. We'll make it bigger. I think Shashank Joshi or Joshi. And so in the card citation, because this whole thing is called the citation, but this will be like, say, the short citation. This will be the only thing you read. You read the tagline, and then you read the citation, and then this all is going to be smaller because you can ignore it. It's where, but the components of this is the author's full name, so you just have the last name here, and then the year is published, and then sometimes you'll see people say what the author did. So this is a very, very long credentials, author credentials. Sometimes you won't even see it at all, but typically if a card is controversial or they're saying something where a lot of people might say the opposite, you might want to find the credentials for the author so you can leverage them. Like, say someone had a card that said the exact opposite of this, which you'll definitely find. Being able to say, hey, my author, Shashank, he did this, and that's why he's more credible than your author who made like a blog post and hasn't like no credentials for talking about this subject. And so that's why you might want to have that there. That's why you'll see that. Oh, I didn't even get the whole thing. It goes all the way. Oh my gosh, it goes all the way here. This is the whole credential. So a lot of this is credentials, but then they have the full date here. So we said 2018 in the citation, the small citation, but then they have the month and the date here. And then the title of the article. If you go to this article, we won't bother with that right now. This is the title of it in quotation marks. And then they have the publisher, which is the Institute for Global Change. You can kind of tell because of this URL, institute.global, and then they have the URL. These are all necessary, important components that you want to have. Now, if you're cutting a card, which we'll have an episode where we talk about cutting cards later, but you'll want to make sure that you get the URL and the date. Those are the two most important things. And then also the author name, if it exists. And then this is just the initials of the person who actually cut this card. I did not cut this card. Whoever's initials this is from whatever file I got it from is the person who cut this card. Because you won't need to cut every single card you read in debate. If the wheel's been invented, don't reinvent it. But you'll want to cut cards in situations where it makes sense to. And so this is the example of a card. You'll read a lot of cards in debate. You can also refer to them as evidence. You want to remember when you're reading cards what the tagline is and what the author is so that you can reference them later. Be like, remember Joshi or extend Joshi who said, and then you can pull specific warrants of the card. So like the highlighting typically is what indicates what you're supposed to read in the debate. Sometimes that's different, but most of the time that's the pretty agreed upon definition for what we are supposed to read and what we aren't. And typically what I'll see people say is the bold is supposed to be where you put emphasis when you're reading. So like autocracies present challenges, the problem they pose to the world order, and then kind of just gives you an idea of the spots that you might want to emphasize when you're reading. Sometimes you'll see people will put things in boxes. I don't know if I have an example of that, and I don't know off the top of my head how to do that. I think it might be the borders. Yes. It'll be these outside borders. So people will put things in boxes. Sometimes that will indicate a key warrant. So like say the author will give a warrant is the argument or the evidence that the author is giving to make a very specific point. So like this whole thing is trying to say this, but a warrant would be a specific line or like maybe a few words that like is the evidence that the author is using to try to make their point, or the argument that the author is using to try to make their point. And so whenever people's like, what are the warrants of Joshi? What they're asking is they want to know what from this, like if you can narrow it down, is how you get this. Or what is the warrant that helps you? Maybe it's not in the tagline, but maybe this author is making a different claim outside of just what you're reading in the tagline, and your opponents are like, okay, where did the author say that? Or what's the warrant for that? They're asking for you to point out the specific part of the card where Shashank Joshi made that specific argument. So obviously you aren't going to have to worry about this one as much. Well, actually maybe on the Arctic topic if you're debating that one, because this is especially pertinent for that. But it was more pertinent for this case. That's why I threw it on there, because I had an advantage about Russia-China war. Next, we'll go over an overview, just an example for that. So when you're extending your arguments, or I guess you really need to be extending your arguments, we should initially start with that, because some people might not know that. In the speeches after the first negative and first affirmative, you're going to want to make sure you're extending your arguments. And the reason for that I like to tell people is pretty simple. It's because if you don't extend your arguments, then the judge has to decide for you what's important and what's not. They have to make their own arguments and extrapolations for your arguments, which means that they're kind of, in a way, debating for you. And so it's your job as debaters to demonstrate that you know what your arguments are and that you understand the parts of your arguments that matter. And there's a lot of ways that you can make things easier for yourself when extending. Like if you're going into a debate and you don't have something like this is what I would read every time in the 2AC. All of these extension things, these are parts from my 1AC. Like our 1AC said, had a card from Gettinger in 25 and a card from Zenko and Krebs and Boyle in 15. All of these cards. And these were a little bit shorter because it was for a different style of debate. But and you might want to have these a little bit longer. But your extensions should tell you what was Gettinger 25 saying. And ideally, in a longer version of the overview, you might want to give some examples or some warrants from the card that tell you why Gettinger 25 was saying proliferating drones, or why states are proliferating drones. But do as I say, not how I do. Definitely have probably some better extensions than these, but bare minimum, you want something like this where you're extending all of the different cards from your 1AC that are relevant, which should be all of them. You shouldn't be reading cards in the 1AC that you never want to extend, unless if you have a very specific reason for that. But for novices, don't worry about that. If you read it in the 1AC, chances are you should be extending it. Yeah, so you want to have some sort of like example for this with the overview for the affirmative. Same thing goes with the negative. Like if you're reading the negative and you read the 1 and C and you make all those arguments, your 2 and C, whenever you're 2 and C, 1 and R, whenever you're extending those arguments, you want to do the same thing. Like if you read a disad, say Gettinger 25 was the uniqueness for your disad, you'll still want to extend that. And say Zenko and Krebs is the link, you'll want to extend that too. But typically, you'll want to do that where the argument was made. Like the AF, typically, the negative and the 1 and C will read their negative case first and then the AF. And then the 2AC, you should do the AF and then the negative case. Typically, topicality is the exception to that rule. Like you do topicality and then case. But I've even seen people who don't really care to do that, and I don't personally mind that either. But you do the case, and you extend the AF case, and then respond to all of the arguments that were made against the AF case in the same point in time in the debate. Like you don't do one and then go do the other. It's like you extend the AF, and then respond to all of the arguments on the AF, and then you move on to like the disad or the counter plan. And then when you're extending the disad or the counter plan, you do those extensions when you're answering their responses to the disad or the counter plan. But yeah, I want to kind of wrap this up because it's running a little bit longer because I love to talk if you haven't seen that already. But I'd have this big case file, lots of words, and this is what I would say is probably one of the smaller ones that just had blocks. These are all examples of blocks. If I was trying to respond to the South China Sea DA, I've got a 2AC frontline, had all the arguments that I knew I wanted to read every single time against the South China Sea DA. And then I had all these other arguments that I would situationally grab and throw into my speech document. So this is just an example of what a debate file looks like, and we talked about what a card is. So hopefully when we're going through these quicker ones, where we're just going through single issue subjects, a lot of this will make a whole lot more sense. Thanks for tuning into this one. Next one, we should be talking about how to install verbatim and what to do, and hopefully you're able to do that, and then we can get going on preparation for files and stuff. All right, awesome, thanks.